Hi there, my name is Sifiso Falala. I am the founder and CEO of the African Genius Awards. What a pleasure to be joined by Professor Collen Masimirembwa today from Wits University, but even more than that, he will tell us about his background and the work that he's doing. The African Genius Awards stands for African Excellence and Exceptionalism. We have 5 pillars that underscore the things that we stand for. The one pillar is problem-solving skills, where we feel that if we advance the practice of finding ways and methods of solving problems on the continent, that would make the continent much better in various spheres, ranging from social life to science to engineering, technology, infrastructure. The second pillar is global competitiveness, where Africa has a right to compete with other countries across the world. We believe, as the African Genius Awards, that competitiveness should not be seen as a taboo. It should not be countenanced as something that is radical or anti-African. The third pillar that we have as African Genius Awards is self-love. The perception that as Africans, we have a unique identity, that we are proud of that identity and we foster it. It doesn't imbue us with any disadvantage. If anything, it grants us many privileges, and the weather that we have, the people around us, the labor, the resources that we have, all enable us to excel. So self-love is a very important pillar. The fourth one is patriotism, which is love for the continent and love for the countries within the continent. Love is not something that one just speaks about, but love is something that one practices, that we have practiced love. Things that we do for our continent, things that we do for our countries to demonstrate that we love them. And the fifth one, before I bore you, Prof, is organizing success, engineering success, where we have skills beyond solving problems that allow us to agitate for, organize, mobilize, create successful situations out of desperate situations. So, and you'd agree with me that when we look at the continent in general, we need more people like yourself that can organize success in places where it is least expected, so that if the numbers of people who do such things, the kind of work that you're doing, increases, then we could end up with a continent that is vastly different to the one that we have now. So, having said that, given you the context, those are the 5 pillars upon which the African Genius Awards are based. I would like to congratulate you sincerely for being nominated as a potential African genius for your outstanding work. Your work is so intricate, sophisticated, scientific, that it's very difficult for the layperson to understand it. Perhaps you can just tell us very briefly about what you're doing right now. Currently, I know you're very busy. What sort of projects are you involved in? What kind of training did you have to get in order to be in a position to do what you're doing now?
Thank you very much. I mean, it's just so inspiring to hear about these 5 pillars. I'll just start by introducing myself. It's Collen Masimirembwa. I am affiliated to 2 institutions, the African Institute of Biomedical Science and Technology in Zimbabwe and the Wits University here in South Africa. So I commute between these 2 institutes whilst I'm conducting the work I do. So my training, I trained as a biochemist. And that time the focus was a lot on understanding, human physiology, and I quickly realized that this is being sort of taken advantage to understand human disease and how to treat it. So I quickly became interested in genomics and therapeutics. So whilst my PhD at Karolinska Institute in Sweden was in medical biophysics and biochemistry, And then I quickly joined the pharmaceutical industry, where I now combined my interest in therapeutics, how chemicals are harnessed as medicines, and genomics, which was an emerging area on understanding how do people's risk for disease differ from person to person, from population to population, and how their response to medicine also differs. So I combined those two. So the current work I'm doing really reflects this 30 years of commitment in this area, where right now, for example, I'm involved in a project at the Wits, also working with the Baragwanath Hospital, where we are looking at African women's response to breast cancer medicines. And what we have shown is that most of the women are likely not to get the best outcome from the medicines because of their genetic makeup, where they have a genetic variation, which we discovered way back in 1996, that makes them not able to activate a particular drug called tamoxifen to its active byproduct. So they are given the standard dose, but they're not able to process the medicine so that it becomes effective. And we are now proposing changing the dose of that particular drug so that instead of getting the 20 milligrams, maybe if they get 40 milligrams, they will now, the body will have enough material to change the active metabolite. That way, more women will be more, will have a favorable outcome in their breast cancer treatment. So that's one project we are doing in cancer. But of course, we have understood that Africa faces a dual burden of infectious diseases and non-communicable diseases. So in the infectious diseases, of course, our traditional burden has been HIV and TB. And we have done a lot of work in this area. For example, in the HIV area, around 2015, we managed to understand why people were having severe neuropsychiatric side effects to one of the HIV drugs called efavirenz. And we demonstrated the genetic reason for that. And we made a lot of lobbying and talking WHO, World Health Organization, the Ministries of Health, and eventually the dose of that drug was reduced in order to reduce the side effects. So we were able to now demonstrate that the genetic makeup of people has a lot to do or to how they respond to medicines. So I just want to conclude by saying that our work, which combines understanding of therapeutics and understanding individual and population genetics, has a huge impact on treatment outcome. And our work is both in the non-communicable disease space, because it's on the rise in our sort of communities, and the traditional infectious diseases. So that's dual burden. We need to confront it with science. I'll stop there.
No, that's amazing, Prof. And I just wonder what is it that inspires you, because I've set out what our 5 pillars are. First of all, the things you talk about are mind-boggling, and most of us would be confused right at the first instance to think about even getting involved. Why did you get involved in this, and do you not find it difficult to do what you do, and where are you taking this? What is the next phase of excellence that you are aspiring for?
So how I got into this it was really early in my education, almost in high school, that the chemical structures just totally fascinated me, for no academic or intellectual reason, but just to think that these atoms, C, H, O, if they are put together, they will produce sugar. Put together, they will produce a drug. Put together, they will produce a poison. Just that mere curiosity. So that really set me for a career in chemistry. And then as I was going along, of course, when you are still young, you don't understand exactly why these fascinations are there. But once I was at university, I started to really understand that the biopharmaceutical industry was a whole area where African scientists were absent. And I remember very well when I was now going for my master's, I said I want to go and study in Sweden, so that I can, because that time there was a big pharmaceutical company there called AstraZeneca, and I wanted to understand what is it that they do that make them produce the drugs that are saving people's lives, and there's no company locally. And with that youthful enthusiasm, I then went to Sweden, did my PhD at Karolinska Institute. Whilst I was doing it, the whole interest in genetics started to rise. People started to talk about, so the genetics is basically the sort of chemical instruction in you based in DNA that tells us who you are physiologically, that tells in terms of disease and how you, who you are in total. It's a blueprint, so to speak. But that time it was just theoretical. But it started to find its way in the industry as well, in the biotechnology industry. And I got so fascinated again. When I'm talking to you, I'm beginning to see the patterns. Again, I realized that DNA is this instruction based on 4 chemicals, GCTA. And it's just how they are arranged in you, which can cause you to be at resist certain infections, whilst maybe for me the order of those chemicals makes me susceptible to a particular disease. And industry was beginning to say, this is the future for diagnostics, this is the future for drugs. So I was able then to combine my 2 interests founded on the fascination of molecules. So really, I think from the around 2000, I was working in the biopharmaceutical industry. For 10 years, I worked in the biopharmaceutical industry. And there I had a really sobering realization that Africa was absent in this space. And I remember saying, it cannot be. And I think in 2002, that's when I established the company called the African Institute of Biomedical Science and Technology, with the clear purpose to say, how do I empower Africa to be part of this exercise? Because whilst we are 17–18% of the world population, we carry 25% of the disease burden. And when we look at research and development, our contribution is less than 2%. So those figures, I could not have peace with those. Yeah. So that's how I established that institute. Then I came back in 2008 with a seemingly crazy ambition to sort of say, we are going to do drug discovery here in Africa because we have a responsibility for ourselves. We cannot subcontract our health to other people. Yes, they can help us, but it is our responsibility. That's why I was so fascinated by the 5 pillars you described, because I feel like I'm at home, because this is exact. So really, this is how I ended up, therefore, with having a very strong academic background, both training at the University of Zimbabwe, training at Karolinska Institute, and then a strong background in the biopharmaceutical industry, where I worked for 10 years. And I felt that if I'm not ready, I will never be ready to do something transformative on the continent. That's why then I came back and I started this institute. And ever since, I've been promoting the science of drug discovery in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, organizing trainings to bring up a new generation of young scientists who could see this gap and unmet need. And as a result, the work we have done now, I think it speaks to a certain level of success, which I feel proud of, but I believe that we can do even more. So that is why I am where I am now, where I am a very strong advocate of translational science. I feel that whilst we need to continuously do fundamental science, we need to translate whatever knowledge we now have, whatever findings we have, to solutions, which are products and services. And we need to be able to sort of say, those people are having a better situation because of our innovation.
Right.
Yes.
It's fascinating for the average person that they talk about GMOs, genetically modified, and usually this could relate to mealie meal. It could be different types of crops that are genetically modified. And most of us not aware of the science. We often are not sure if this is a good or a bad thing, particularly as we are not too well informed about why in the first instance these plants or crops are having to be genetically modified. In other words, did God not do a good job? Because God must have created them in a certain way. And I suppose nothing is perfect, but you can address that because you're an expert in that subject. And then, in addition to that, you start wondering about the power of an organization such as the one that you founded, because then it is able, if we need to do GMOs, to actually dictate how they are done, in the sense that each individual has a blueprint which resides within their genes. And within that blueprint, potentially they would respond differently to certain types of genetically modified crops. And further to that, I heard from my general practitioner actually that Africans reacted differently to certain types of medicines. And I think you just confirmed that perhaps certain types of medicines may not necessarily be as efficacious with an African population as they are with, say, a Western population. And for that reason, the importance of localized problem solving, localized creation of solutions, such as medicines, but also including the food that we eat. What's your comment on that?
Well, I'll comment more on the medical because that's where I spent most of my scientific effort on. In terms of GMO in the agricultural sector, I will just make a general comment because that's not my area of expertise. I think your last comment about how genetic variation between individuals and between population has now emerged as an important driver on what we are calling precision medicine, where we are saying one treatment for fits all is not the way to practice medicine. Interestingly, even the traditional healers way back knew that. They would end up saying, your family, I cannot treat them. And people didn't understand, but probably they had already seen from observations that each time I treat a person from this family, it never works out. But in terms of the genetically sort of motivated or inspired precision medicine, we quickly saw that for a number of drugs that were discovered and clinically developed in the global north, because most of the pharmaceutical industries are there. So the clinical trials were conducted for the choice of the doses, and everything was done and optimized for Europe and North America. And when those drugs came to Africa, we are starting to see, and we have already, as I've told you about efavirenz, that some of the drugs, the doses that we arrived at and are safe in Europe, are not necessarily safe here. So what we did over the past 20 years, we've been sequencing the genes of people of African ancestry, and we have been discovering unique signatures. And we have used those now to come up with a genetic test, which is called the Genopharm, which is one of the first genetic tests to be sort of developed here in Africa and registered. And we call it Genopharm, simply genomics affecting pharmaceutics. And what we have done in that test, we have put genetic variation unique to people of African ancestry. So now when a doctor comes, they should be able to first request a genetic test. So we can predict which drug you should be given or not given, based on your genetic makeup. And we can also predict if this is the drug you're going to be given, what is the right dose for you so that you have minimum adverse drug reactions and optimal effectiveness of the medicines. So we have made a clear contribution in that area of precision medicine where we really understand that genetic variation is going to influence treatment outcome. And it's the same thing you will find that people of different populations have different risks for different diseases. So we are thinking that this is an area is where we are already making an impact. And I think our people are going to continuously benefit as we go forward. When it comes to the issue of GMOs, I think there has been huge debates around the safety of these kind of products, but more importantly, more to do with the environmental impact. If you bring something which is not in balance with the other crops, will it end up being outgrowing all the other crops? And this can end up with a lot of environmental challenges. So I think that the debate is slowly shifting more to do with how do we ensure that there is no ecological or environmental imbalance, rather than the safety itself of consuming the products from GMO, because it has been clearly shown that in terms of food security, it can go a long way to really improve that particular sector. And then sometimes people get caught up with what I would call academic debates, which are not really responding to the challenge on the ground for food security, in particular across Africa. We need to be food secure, and sometimes we don't have to be caught up in what I would call academic or debates that are not looking at. But the issue of environmental challenges probably is something that has to be looked into. But I would not want to comment further there, but more to focus on the medical advances and breakthroughs we are making.
Well, congratulations, Professor, once again on your achievements. And I think from the sounds of things, there's more to come from you. We certainly look forward with interest to some of the work that you continue to do. I have one final question for you, maybe just in closing. Medicine and ethics. Because there's something that you mentioned earlier, traditional healers, and I think the work that they do or how they do their ethics needs to be considered from the point of view that typically they claim to cure diseases, whereas if you look around, the medicine that is used in most cases in our society today, a lot of it is known as chronic medication. And by definition, to a layperson like myself, chronic medication is not a cure. It doesn't cure. It doesn't cure the underlying cause, because you have to keep taking it the way you take food or you take water. So when people in fields similar to yours come up with medicines, is there a contemplation of coming up with medicine that can actually provide a cure, as opposed to chronic medication? Because the pharmaceutical industry at times has been accused of profiteering or making a profit, unduly so, from giving people chronic medication as opposed to giving them curative medication, which sounds like it sounds counterintuitive that the pharmaceutical industry would be interested in curing people more than they would be interested in getting them onto a drug set that the people need for the rest of their lives. So are there ethical standards in medicines, and could Africa perhaps lead the way there in terms of emphasizing more on the curative side of medicine more than kind of the chronic side of it?
I must say that's a very complex but pertinent question. Having worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and this discussion is ongoing in terms of what are the business interests and what are the health impact interests. And one would obviously think that if you treat and cure something, you have finished, destroyed your business model. But I must say, during my stay in the industry and at the level of scientists, you don't see that coming through. The scientists who are working in the pharmaceutical industry are highly motivated people to find solutions. It's just that some of the diseases are just very complicated. Like, say, for hypertension, it's not like one disease, it's a complex form of disease. And right now, people start by saying, can we alleviate the symptoms? And this is where this chronic medication comes in, that if you stop, it comes up. If you look at HIV, the effort has been ongoing. You know, we started with these very toxic medicines, and if you stop taking them, the disease flares up again. And now we are having these twice a year injections, so I would want, on behalf of sort of scientists, I would speak about scientists working in the pharmaceutical industry, there isn't a conspiracy among scientists to sort of, I would not speak at a business level, but at the scientist level, there is a clear shared interest to cure the diseases, but sometimes the complexity of the diseases are just daunting. Where the cure is possible, the drugs that cure are there. But I'm still aware of your issue about the business model. And when we come to African practice of medicine, I guess what happened to our traditional knowledge systems, they they collided with the conventional medicine along the way, and then they were pushed under. And there is now an effort to lift them up. So at the moment, I feel that they are still battling to surface from after they had been pushed down by the conventional medicines. But I think that the personalized medicine, I feel, was already in action in the traditional medical practice, like I've indicated. But in terms of curative approach, I think sometimes because of lack of some knowledge, people, if they cure the symptoms, they would say the disease is cured. So I believe that traditional knowledge systems must continue their battle for recognition to come to the surface. But at the same time, it's not a battle to sort of say, I know it all, but to also borrow from the elements of technology that have come up. How do we identify the active ingredients? Because traditional knowledge systems suffered that they didn't know what was actually curing. How do you scale whatever solution you have? It was more, and also how do you document how you're doing things? Was it necessary to complicate it with spiritualism and everything, when sometimes it's just a chemical which is treating? So I feel that the traditional knowledge systems are on the right path of emerging to be recognized, but they need to also take into account the technological advancements that are emerging to enhance their contribution. So in terms of ethics around all these things, I think that Africa has been trying to both build systems that control and regulate the drug discovery and development system, how you do clinical trials, how do you include people without violating their rights and so forth. So you have organizations like SAPRA who really try to make sure that people are not, abused in the whole system. And then continent-wide, we have something called AMA, African Medicines Agency, which is also trying to regularize such that no one country is put in a corner to do something unethical because there are other incentives. But there's a continental framework that protects maybe individual regions. So I think that the ethics are evolving, but like everywhere else, not unique to Africa, the ethics framework or ethical, legal, and social framework usually is lagging behind the technological advances. The technologies are so fast, and the ethics is lagging behind to try to come and regularize these kind of things. So I feel that whether it's conventional pharmaceutical medicine or traditional medicine, they are all grappling with the issue of ethics. But I'm an optimistic person. I believe that we are doing the best we can, and we will continue to be challenged by technological advancements. I mean, right, and we just need to reduce the gap so that the ethics is not far behind. Because like you are saying, the GMOs, if the ethics becomes very old-fashioned, we will not enjoy the benefits of technological advancements, because our first answer will be no. So I just want to conclude by saying I believe that Africa has recognized its requirement to participate and not just be the sort of recipient of guidelines and so forth, but we are co-authoring guidelines that govern the conduct of clinical studies, that govern the sort of distribution of medicines and their use, rather than just receiving them from the global north and say it must work for us. So that's how I would sort of comment on that.
Thank you, Prof. And in this nomination of an African genius, which you have earned, and justly so, you join the likes of Professor Chilidzi Marwala, Professor Chifularo, Aliko Dangote, Steve Biko, Chinua Achebe. So these are esteemed, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, these are esteemed African names that you join. So we're very pleased about that. But what does it mean to you personally to be nominated for an African Genius Award?
I mean, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. When you are in the business of science, we are always trapped in humility, where we do our things in the labs and usually nobody notices what we are doing. But I really, for me to be nominated for this award was both surprisingly sort of inspiring, and for me it would really help me to become a role model for the next generation of scientists, to say these things we work with molecules and with hypotheses to improve human health. Someone is listening, someone is watching, and someone recognizes the value and impact in society. So for me, and it also is a recognition of all the people I've worked with, because you don't do it alone. So for the past 30 years, I've worked with amazing students whom I have supervised, I've mentored. I've worked with many collaborators at the VITS, in Kenya, in Nigeria. So that nomination for me is a collective recognition. And there's nothing that can be better than that. And most importantly, to be recognized at home. Yeah. Because I've received a number of awards globally, but this one is super special in that you feel a sense of that home wants you, home recognizes you, and you are playing your part in the bigger picture.
Well, we will continue to work with you. We will continue to watch, as you've noticed that we've been watching. Yes. And from time to time, we might invite you just as one of our nominees or one of our geniuses to take part in discussions that might require your expertise and knowledge. Thank you so much for coming today and joining these discussions, and congratulations once again on your success. May you see more in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Yeah.